Hello and welcome to Switch Scheme. This is the Reviewing My Collection series where I take a game that's older off my shelf and give it a modern review, seeing if it holds up from when it was first released or if it's just as bad as we all remember. This time we're taking a look at the Atelier Ryza trilogy. We'll be discussing each game's story, gameplay, audio, and value. If you enjoyed the content, drop a like and sub. Keep an eye out for the code word for the month-long giveaway and make sure to use it in the comments to enter. Did you ever play Atelier Ryza? If not, have you ever played any of the Atelier games? Let's get into it. The story of the first game is typical start to any series. Our protagonist, Rysalind Stout, lives on an island and dreams of what's beyond the blue sea. Her friends, Lent and Tao, who also want to venture out into the world, dream alongside her as they work their usual tasks, not only just to see what the world has to offer, but to also escape their personal issues or trauma. One day, they happen upon a couple of alchemists who change the trajectory of their life forever. There are some interesting aspects here involving childhood friends who have now since become rivals, alternate dimensions with invading forces, and a growing need to understand magic and how to use it to push back said evil forces. The story is pretty good, and what makes it compelling is the early game story. Now this is a double-edged sword. On one hand, the early parts of the story do a great job at giving you a lot of time to grow attached to these characters, their motivations, and understanding why their motivations land where they do. On the other hand, the intro is just so slow and it takes a long time for this game to start ramping up. But if you enjoy character growth, it'll be worth it. The second game's story takes place 3 years after the first game's conclusion and character development. Ryza is able to leave her island now and go to the bustling city in order to find her old friend Tao. They travel together to a ruin where their inquisitive nature leads to Ryza finding a strange glowing object. She later learns that this is actually an egg, and once it hatches, she realizes that the ruins go much deeper, both in length and purpose, than they initially thought, and thus their new adventure begins. The story here honestly feels a bit better, both in pacing and narrative. Thankfully, the developers learned from the complaints of the first game, and the early stages of this one aren't so slowly drawn out. Likely, of course, due to the story already having our main character be an experienced alchemist and combat veteran. Atelier Ryza 3 continues the story taking place 1 year after the second entry. The gang is all here when a random set of islands appear in the ocean near Ryza's home. After defeating some monsters that they were unaware of, they realize that they came from these mysterious islands and of course want to venture out to learn more. Ryza hears voices in her head that tell her to use her abilities to synthesize a key, a specific key that Ryza has no familiarity with. She takes the key to the islands, and although the key helps in some ways, there's a door that is inaccessible. Eventually, figuring out how to open the door, it leads to research and information regarding dragons, and their adventure begins. It's another huge win in the story department, and it's so emotionally backed by the characters that you truly care till the end. When it comes to the Ryza series, all 3 games tell a linearly linked story that makes playing each one in order feel great. It starts off super slow with number 1's egregiously long early game, but once it gets rolling, as you finish one game and move on to the next, it really starts to feel like all 3 games were meant to be played back to back. With each story being delivered so well, there really isn't any point where anything feels overly hokey or underwhelming. Sadly, the side quests and alternate tasks are very simple and uninspired, but the main story alone carries the series to a high score. The first game in the series introduces the alchemy system in such a way that newcomers will easily grasp what makes these games so unique. The heavy reliance on alchemy has always been a staple, and thankfully some of the more tedious or complicated portions have been streamlined. Creating gear and consumables feels like a fun side job rather than a slog or a complicated mess that can easily confuse new players. The system can still go pretty deep though, like any other, but the way it's presented allows it to be easily digested by anyone who picks this up. Along with the new alchemy overhaul comes a change to the series' core combat. It's a fast-paced mix of real-time and turn-based combat that keeps you very engaged. You have to time your attacks while also building up an AP system in order to unleash your special abilities. Instead of most games in the genre where you just have a menu you go to in order to find consumables or offensive items, they are displayed here on a main UI and can be accessed so long as you have charges for them. In order to recharge that item, you'll need to revisit your atelier and perform some alchemic magic, then head back out once you're ready to go again. This need to go back and forth with your atelier really helps the loop of alchemy and combat feed into one another. You can't just make an infinite amount of any one item for combat as you are limited by the charge system. At first this will sound like a strange choice, but it really makes these two systems integrate much better. The gameplay of the second Ryza is relatively the same, which is a positive. The difference is that since the story is set when your character is already an accomplished alchemist, it isn't afraid to throw more difficult enemies or bosses at you, forcing you to really step up your game. It's not like some extreme challenge that only hardcore gamers will enjoy, but in the grand scheme of Atelier and the Ryza trilogy, it's a welcome bump that requires more strategy. As for changes with the alchemy systems, there isn't much. Why fix what's not broken? They did, however, add the ability to combine crafted items together in order to either increase their strength or fuse them into things you've never seen before. And this leads to crafting more than needed, not feeling like such a waste. Another small addition is a new skill tree that Ryza can access, leading to even more recipes and skills. Ryza 3 doesn't change too much, but it does add a few quality of life improvements to the synthesizing and combat. It's nothing game-breaking, it just overall makes things more relaxing. The big change here though is that they added a key system. During combat, you can create and craft keys to sort of absorb the powers of the enemies you're facing, allowing you later to use those keys to help in combat or even interact with your environment. It's a really cool concept that makes you want to explore for rare spawns or even risk high levels of challenge with the hope of crafting the perfect keys. The game does not just hand them out, and some of the best keys can only be crafted through exploration and rare creatures, which means that you will spend a lot of time looking for any and all enemies, a stark contrast to most JRPGs where after some time you just try to avoid everything because it's in your way. Another new concept that the developers attempted here is sort of an open world hub system. You drop in and can roam around exploring every inch of the hub, and these hubs aren't no slouch either. They're pretty big, and I believe there's 4, so it offers a lot of secrets to find. One thing that all 3 games suffer from though on the gameplay front is English dubbing or voiceover. Now I personally don't care. I watch tons of anime regularly and I've never taken issue with subtitles, as dubs are usually inferior. But when trying to reach a new audience, I really do believe that this series could have benefited from English voiceover, as there will always be those who refuse a game or movie because they have to read subtitles. I will lump the audio of all 3 together. The music weaves between genres, from slow orchestral, sometimes even relaxing tunes, to heavy beats with electric guitars or violins. It hits many facets of what stringed instruments can do, and it's rather impressive. They also use a lot of piano scores to soothe the mind while traversing some areas or to hit those somber moments. The voice acting is fine, although I really can't judge Japanese voice acting because I'm not a native speaker, but from my perspective, it did well.
威張り散らすだけならまだしも、しつこく嫌がらせまで。
村の水源を握る有力者様のお坊ちゃんだからな。
The sound effects can lack in some small spots, but overall the mix of music and voice acting make all other small shortcomings irrelevant. Along with the audio, let's discuss value for the trilogy as a whole. You're looking at 70 to 80 hours of gameplay, if you focus on the main story alone, with well over 150 if you want to explore everything and engage in all the systems to their fullest. That's a lot of value for your dollar. Each game on its own will average 25 to 35 hours, with each game in the trilogy being longer than the last. One big downside though is that Atelier Ryza 2 always seems to be price gouged a bit higher above the others. Every time I look, Ryza 1 is about 60, Ryza 2 is 80, and Ryza 3 is between 50 and 60. I'm not sure why beyond the obvious assumption that Ryza 2 didn't have as many copies printed, but I was able to find a used copy for $30 at my local game store rather than trying to purchase it online from some jerk who price hikes items that people want. For me, the value is there, and I have a small surprise for those of you who stuck around this long. I have an extra copy of Atelier Ryza 2 that I'm willing to give away as a Christmas gift. All you gotta do is email me at 1_minute_reviews@yahoo.com and in the subject line put Ryza 2. In the body, you can say whatever you want. Please make sure that you use Ryza 2 in the subject line so when I filter, I can locate them. I will draw the winner at the end of the month alongside the eShop code winners. Keep in mind that this will require you share your address with me so I can ship it to you, so if you're uncomfortable with that, just know this going in. Anyways, back to the review. Overall, this trilogy is one of my favorites on the Switch. Ryza was one of my favorite games of the year, and I'm so glad that Gus seems to have nailed down their formula. I honestly hope the next Atelier game starts a new trilogy with a new set of characters, as I feel 3 was a good stopping point for Ryza and her companions. Atelier is 24 games deep, with Ryza Trilogy being the most recent 3, and most people at this point would say 24 is too many. I say please bring us more of this perfectly crafted formula that you have created in your Atelier.